So we're going to move on to post office policies here now with Graham Ward, and it appears that there are some relevant policies to do with timescales and procedures of investigations, and they seem to be awfully tight. They seem to be suggesting as soon as a case is opened that the suspect in the case should be interviewed within 48 hours, and that all cases, including major inquiries, should be concluded within a month. 1 month. That doesn't seem to leave a lot of time for thorough investigation, and there is a part where he says that he's not involved in any strategy whatsoever, so was presumably solely following this document and its outlines. Let's take a closer look at it and jump into the inquiry.
Can we move on, please? I'm going to turn to investigation policies, strategies and decisions to prosecute. And to start with your role in relation to post office investigations and prosecutions against subpostmasters. You tell us in your witness statement, and this is paragraph 6 on page 5, no need to turn it up. You say that your role in relation to disciplinary matters was limited to those staff you line manage directly.
That's correct, yeah.
And you don't recall ever having to deal with any disciplinary issues in your time in post office?
No.
When you were an investigation manager, you interviewed suspect offenders and were responsible for disclosure in those cases.
Yeah.
Did that role involve gathering information and evidence that might be relevant to a disciplinary proceeding against the subpostmaster?
Yeah, that would do, yeah.
So no disciplinary proceedings against the people that he line managed. Well, he seems to be line managing administrators from what we're talking about. But then again, the key issue here is that there seems to be no oversight of the investigators and any potential disciplinary issues that would arise there. Presumably that meant that actually they felt like they were doing the job that was expected of them.
The discipline side of subpostmasters, yeah, that would be, we would produce a report for that, and that would include reference to any evidence that had been identified in the investigation. And that would be sent to the contract manager for discipline.
You were involved at that time as an investigation manager in disclosure decisions.
Yeah.
You were responsible for processing disclosure as a casework manager.
Yeah.
And as a financial investigator, were you responsible for disclosure?
Yeah.
And in all three functions, did you liaise with members of the criminal law team in relation to your own cases?
Yeah.
Did you liaise with the civil litigation lawyers within the post office in each of those three functions?
My involvement with civil litigation from memory was in relation to provision of ARQ data, if I was asked, in my SPOC role as casework manager.
So that was only when you were assistant casework manager and casework manager?
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
So there is some additional parts to the casework management role that he's talking about here in terms of requesting the ARQ data. So that is at least, some kind of substantial duty which appears to have been on them.
Did you have any involvement in what might be described as litigation strategy or prosecution strategy?
No.
At any point in your career in the post office?
No, not at all.
You tell us in terms of policies, procedures, that post office's policy in relation to the investigation and prosecution of offenders was the same for all post office employees as well as for subpostmasters, managers and staff.
Yeah, that's correct.
And you tell us about a triggers and timescales document which broadly outlined the types of cases that the team would investigate and the expected timescales for completion.
Yeah, that's correct.
Can we look, please, at poll 0010 5221, please? Can you see that this is described as a document of the security operations team?
I don't have anything on my screen.
Well, I'm sorry about that. Somebody will come and press a button on your screen. It may have gone to sleep.
I mean, look at that there in terms of major inquiry. Case to be at the suspect offender interviewed and submitted or closure stage within 1 month of raise, as in get this done within a month, get it done as fast as possible. That's surely not conducive to a thorough investigation, you would have thought.
As I said, somebody will come and press a button. Good.
And there, no wonder they were getting the interviews arranged straight away. Case to be at suspect offender interviewed within 48 hours where practically possible. I mean, these are very fast timescales to turn things around. From going in, from having an inquiry raised to interviewing them within 48 hours to closing it or prosecuting them or attempting to prosecute them within a month. This seems like very fast timescales for what surely could be very complex cases.
Is that now working?
Yep.
Can you see the triggers and timescales document on the screen?
Yes, I can, yeah.
Is this the type of document you were referring to when you referred to a triggers and timescales document?
Yes, it is.
In your witness statement?
Yes, it is, yeah.
And when would this have been operative? In which of your many functions would this have been relevant?
I would say casework, probably 2002, 2004 to 2007.
And who was this addressed to?
I think this was a document put together for the network to make them aware of the cases we dealt with and what the timescales for dealing with them were.
So this was something that came out from the centre, as it were, from the casework management team to the regions?
It's not a document that was put together by casework, I don't think. I think this was put together by Tony Artin.
So that's stepping away from responsibility for it there, almost like he was walking into that then, as in, was it you and people in similar roles that were actually putting together these documents, which were requesting cases to be dealt with very swiftly? Well, I say request, we know the document says this is how it must happen, so less of a request, more of a directive.
And what was the purpose of it?
To make people aware of how we dealt with cases and what the timescales or the expectations would be for processing cases.
And if we scroll on through the document, please, and scroll down, please, we can see essentially the steps in the first two columns and then the time by which that step must be taken in the last column. Is that right? Is that how it works?
Yeah, that's correct, yeah.
And then if we...
And we can see even in the smaller cases there, they're expecting it to either been submitted for prosecution or closure within 2 months, even if it's a small amount or a standard inquiry.
Scroll on, please. Then that's depicted in a different way in that infographic there.
Yeah.
And then if we can look, please, at poll 0010 5220. And if we scroll down, please, a little bit, just so we get the heading as well. Thank you. Do you remember this document? Or the type of information contained on it?
Yeah, I think it's sort of not that familiar now, but yeah, it looks like a document that went with the triggers and timescale.
The other one was more about timeliness and the steps which must be taken within certain timeframes. Is that right?
Yeah, that's correct.
Whereas this is about raising cases, i.e. what must be investigated, what may be investigated and what need not.
Yes.
Is that right?
That's correct, yeah.
And so looking at the first box, loss of any amount where there hasn't been a suspension, case raise, what does that mean?
It just means...
Investigate.
Raise a formal case for investigation, yeah.
And so if we fell in that first row there, that need not be or should not be raised for investigation, is that right?
That's correct, yeah.
And then the second box, if the loss is less than £1,000, same answer, is that right?
Yes.
Over what time period, though? I mean, presumably this must be annually, because loss less than 1,000k, for example, not raising a case, where we saw in the case, I think, of Maureen McKelvey, that the losses range from 40 pence in a week to the low hundreds. So I'm guessing these are annual figures on what they're pursuing rather than, weekly or monthly figures, because obviously then a lot of the cases that were subsequently raised wouldn't have been brought in the first place, presumably.
Between £1,000 and £5,000, there seemed to have been discretion as to whether or not to raise a case or not for investigation. Is that right?
That's correct.
And it says to be discussed with the contracts team. Who would decide, well, first of all, who would conduct that discussion with the contracts team?
So if we're talking about audit losses, that would probably be the team leader for the area, I would think. I mean, when audits were reported to the team, the auditors, they may well have a phone number of an investigator just because they've dealt with them previously. So sometimes an auditor would contact an investigator directly. But generally speaking, I would say the team leader would be the one.
And who would make that decision, whether or not within that third row to investigate or not?
I would say it would be a joint decision between the contract manager and the investigator, or the team leader, whoever took the call.
And then scroll down, please. Loss more than £5,000, investigate. Is that right?
That's what that's saying, yeah.
And is that your memory of what the trigger for a certain investigation was, a loss of over £5,000?
I actually thought it was higher than that, but if that's what the document says. I don't know whether there would have been a document following this. Do you know what date this was from?
If we go back to the first page at the top, please, I can check to what document this was, to which document this was an appendix.
All right.
And therefore, I, over the break, I might be able to establish a date.
Because, yeah, I mean, 5K sounds quite low.
Feels low to you?
It does, yeah, but that may well have been the case at that time. Well, it would have been the case at that time, but yeah, I think it might have been increased.
If we just scroll down to the bottom, please. Thank you. It says that this is a guide only. Each loss will be assessed on its own merits and include other factors, admissions, resources, timescales, modus operandi. Yes?
Yes.
The document doesn't list whether there was evidence of dishonesty by the postmaster as a trigger for investigation. It's focused on the loss being the key into whether to investigate or not. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, obviously the investigation would determine whether there was dishonesty or not, but yeah, I mean, that's essentially what the document says, yeah.
And was that the approach that was taken over time, that the amount of loss was the determining factor on whether or not there should be an investigation or not?
I wouldn't have said so, no. I mean, if there was clear evidence of dishonesty, then that would have been investigated regardless of the loss. But as I said, the team reduced over time, so we had to be a bit more selective about the cases we could take on. I think when I first joined the team back in the 90s, I think we had somewhere in the region of 90 investigators. There were at least 9 or 10 teams, I think, maybe 8 or 9 teams, maybe 70 or 80 investigators. I'd say it's not clear to me, but by the time I left, we had considerably less. So we had to be more selective on the cases we took.
Which again is a really strange position for a business which is saying that it's suffering from a lot of fraud. And given these caps in place, you would think that if somebody was inclined to steal from the business, that they would actually then remain under these caps so as not to trigger an investigation if there was any malintent there.
And this does include modus operandi,
Yeah.
as a factor to consider.
Yeah.
I'm just asking, to your knowledge, was the decision primarily on whether to investigate or not, primarily based on the amount of alleged loss, which the table tends to indicate, or an understanding of what it was alleged that the postmaster had done?
I mean, the table indicates that, I agree. But if there was a clear evidence of dishonesty, I'm sure that we would have raised a case on it, regardless of the loss, whether it was, as long as it was over 5,000 or thereabouts, then a case would have been raised, I'm sure.
Well, a case would have been raised according to that document in any case for any loss over 5,000. I think what Jason Beer is trying to drive at here is a loss, even when there are other possible conclusions and reasons for a loss, like keying errors, etc., it was still considered worthy of investigation, which is fair enough to launch the investigation. It's more how the conduct of those investigations proceeded from there to seemingly exclude any other conclusions other than dishonesty by the postmaster.
Thank you.